Today's video is all about teaching you proper hip thrust technique. Now a standard hip thrust is when you've got your back against something like a box or a cushion here and we're driving those hips up to this position, usually with a bar across, or you can obviously do it body weight like I am, or using some other weight across the hips. And when it comes to the best form in terms of muscle recruitment, so engaging those glutes and hamstrings, it's recommended that you arch the back at your start position. So I've got a big arch in the back, I've got my shoulder blades on the box. When I drive up, I'm tucking the hips. So I'll go from an arch position to a tuck position. So arch at the bottom, tuck at the top, and that's going to get the best muscle recruitment from your glutes and hamstrings. So take that forwards and use that at the end of this video too if you're performing a hip thrust. The problem with this technique is that it doesn't apply to some of the variations. For example, if you're performing a staggered hip thrust or a single leg hip thrust, research has shown that the muscle recruitment doesn't matter that you don't have that arch and tuck like we had on the standard hip thrust. It's also hard to utilize that arch and tuck technique when we're performing the glute bridge on the floor, because the floor is obviously in the way of our arch and tuck position. It can kind of cause you to perform two movements, and it's the same when you do a glute bridge on a box too. I have to arch, tuck, and I've kind of had to go through two motions to get there. So by all means use the arch and tuck technique when it comes to hip thrusts, but here are some other pointers that you can take forward into all these variations that are going to help you get a better technique across the board. First of all, we're looking at foot position. So we're looking at feet about shoulder width apart. Now you want those feet nice and close to the bum. The further the feet go away, the more you're going to recruit the hamstrings, which is something you can utilize too if you want to focus on your hamstrings more. So if I take those heels far away, it's going to engage my hamstrings, less glutes. For a general hip thrust, we want to bring those feet in nice and close. Obviously, if you've got a bar here, you need to give yourself enough room for the bar to sit across the top of the hips. Otherwise, try and get those feet nice and close to get a good glute activation. Shoulder width apart we're looking for, and we want to be driving those feet flat into the floor. A lot of people lift those heels. We want to avoid that, do the opposite if anything. We want to drive those heels down into the floor. Some people even find it easy to lift the toes, so they really get that heel drive down. That's not necessary, but can be helpful. Either way, we're looking flat feet, driving the heels down into the floor when we lift up those hips. When it comes to that driving up motion, whether you're on this box or whether you're performing one of the variations, here are the key points you need to make sure you're achieving. So regardless of whether you've kind of got that big arch going on or you've just got a flat, relaxed position, like you would have in a standard glute bridge where my back's flat to the floor, or when performing a single or staggered leg. So let's start with a nice flat position here to cover all variations rather than with that arch. The main thing is when you drive up those hips, our finishing position wants to look like so, where we've got our hips tucked up for that posterior pelvic tilt. Now we've talked about this on the hollow video where we're thinking genitals to belly button, so you've got that tuck upwards. Once you've got that engaged, we're trying to also really squeeze the glutes and drive from the bum, driving those hips up. So we've got a strong core engagement with those hips tucked and a big glute engagement from the bum. Two things we want to avoid from that position is overextending and using the back, which would look like this, where I'm kind of driving onto my shoulders. I've got a big arch in the back. You can see I've got no posterior pelvic tilt because of this, and the back's doing a lot of the work and I'm not getting as much engagement from the glutes. The other thing you want to avoid is not getting that full extension, so still having flexion at the hip, which would look like this, where there's still that bend there. I may have that tuck on, but I'm not driving fully upwards into that glute bridge. If you find that's the case when you're using weight, then you may want to reduce the weight so you can get a full drive up. So what we're looking for is a straight line from your knee to your shoulder. So here, I've got my knee, I've got my hip, which is your midpoint up to the shoulder. That should be a straight line. If there's a drop, that's because there's either flexion at the hip or I'm overextending with the back and my hips have gone too high in this position here. So just a quick recap over everything we've talked about. Flat feet, whether you're going to arch or not, we're going to drive those hips and tuck the hips up. Core strong, glutes squeezing on, straight line from knee to shoulder, strong glute bridge position, and repeat.